I don't either, but it'll be, posterity.
Well, we're live now. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Michael.
So this is the first time either of us have done this, so it's going to be awkward, probably.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And the beginning, when you actually press the button to do live, is always the most awkward 45 seconds.
Yeah, it's like, how do you introduce this since we've already started talking already?
Yeah.
Well, we're doing this as something different just to try it out, see how it goes. More as a way to just have a conversation, and thought it'd be interesting to record it.
Yeah, when we did the BTBA podcast, I mean, the way that I remembered it is before we pressed play, we had talked for 45 minutes or so about, noir and books and film and just a lot of different topics. And, so at some point it was like, well, we should just press record and, see if it's interesting at all to anyone else, because it was a great conversation.
There is a live chat feature, so if anyone wants to join in that way, they can do that.
Awesome.
You can see all that, can't you, Derek?
I can, yeah. I was on private chat, which was just nothing. But now I can see the live chat. That's cool. Yeah, and speaking of the private chat thing, I mentioned this when I tweeted out, but me and you only picked the topic, and you know that I want to talk about a documentary, and I know that you want to talk about a book, but we have not actually discussed our views or thoughts at all on this, which I think is a kind of a cool way to do it, to go in truly surprised,
Well, you said you had a lot to say about this documentary, too much to tweet.
Yes.
So I just thought it might have been a good way to just actually have that conversation.
Well, do you know the documentary?
I do not know the documentary. Can't get it anywhere here.
Well, you were just able to get it here actually on Friday. Then that's when I rented it through a theater. Like some of the independent theaters here that have had to close down, they're doing like virtual screenings. And so this was a documentary that was supposed to be out, but got a virtual screening. I have been hearing about it since I think December, when it was, on like a festival circuit and was just getting buzz as, well, here's a documentary about booksellers and bookselling. I mean, that's obviously like, the passion, and there's not much movies, especially a documentary. So I had been excited forever. So I, was on Friday, was really excited, and me and my wife sat down and watched it. And then, I really didn't like the documentary, which I feel, I always, with books, I always do like positive reviews. So it's weird that the thing I wanted to like start off a rant with was something that I disliked. But I thought the reasons that I disliked it were probably maybe good for a broader discussion. Like, so they focused in that focus, there wasn't much focus, so the documentary like didn't have a point of view often. So it just like was kind of scattered about different stuff. But in general, it was about the rare and antique booksellers and book dealers.
And it was called Booksellers, right?
Yeah, called Booksellers, yep.
And it's solid like a new documentary, is it, I think?
It's not like a what? I'm sorry.
It's fairly recently put together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the footage was, 2019, 2018, the interviews. And like I said, this should be like its opening week if theaters were open.
I've seen a couple of older documentaries about like book collecting and book selling, just on YouTube and stuff. It seems like a really weird hobby, as in like going through festivals, then going to used bookstores, just trying to find a book that's going to be valuable.
Yeah, and and estate sales, like a lot of that, like as someone who they knew had a big library would pass away, um, you know, you'd go to the estate sales, and that part was weird because one of the things they first talked about was that when the internet came along, it killed their business. But one of the reasons that it killed their business was because they were pricing stuff as if it was rare when it wasn't rare.
Yeah.
And I mean specifically like, the Great Gatsby, like a first edition, but not the first, but like one of the, kind of cool Penguin editions or whatever, first edition, they would be selling for $500. What it turned out, it was really kind of worth 50. And to me, like, I had a problem with that because if somebody really wanted that book, or whatever, then like, well, then 50, like, that's cool. It makes it more available, right? I mean, if you wanted to have that, I don't know, like there was just something to the like exploitive nature of books in general where these dealers like wanted to just extract value. And that wasn't across the board, but that was definitely like an element of it.
I think that's probably an element of all those collector types try to make a business out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there was a fine line or no line between the collectors and the dealers. In other words, like the collectors and the dealers seem to be kind of one and the same.
Yeah.
So that once you got the bug or the addiction, you dabbled in both and had your own huge collection. And it's like, oh, maybe I'd sell this and that, but not this, like, and there was just quirky personalities. That the documentary felt like it was more about looking at their quirky personalities as opposed to, the ins and outs really of book collecting beyond just like really, really rich people getting first editions of Jane Eyre. Do you know what I mean? Because like, how interesting is that? If you have an unlimited amount of money, then your library, to me, it would be less interesting, right? Because you could just have whatever you wanted. So are you making any choices,
Yeah, I know. The author of Lonesome Dove wrote a book called Books about the topic of he started his own secondhand bookshop and about trying to find those books that were worth a lot of money. It wasn't that interesting, but it kind of reminds me there are people just in it to make the money, but there are people there that absolutely love books and are passionate about books, and they seem very differently motivated in this career path.
Yeah, I believe I've read that Larry McMurtry, or I've at least read an article just about his store, and I actually like that author. And, there was a time where I like had quite a bit of his work and liked him. I think he melded it in a nice way between a love of books and then, wanting to then also make some money off of it, which is fine. But you touch on something there also that bothered me about the documentary. And I understand it's called book selling, but it was a fetishization of the book as an object, but not about reading. I mean, so many of these things were so old you couldn't open them. And then something else I found funny was, they're the most valuable the better condition they're in. So
Yeah,
the most valuable books have literally not been read because when a book is read, it's in a condition. It's not mint. You know what I mean? Someone opened it, sat with it for, a week, 2 weeks, however long. The spine is a little bent. And I'm more partial to that because I'm partial to reading and to books being like out in the stream of the world. I love used bookshops and finds and stuff like that, but I don't necessarily like the idea, I guess, personally, of, collecting as a way to, like the same way you'd collect art or something. I don't know, just because there's more of there's a utilitarian nature to books. You can open them and read them, and there are ideas in them.
Yeah, I guess with books, it's not much to look at on the outside compared to art.
Right.
You got to go into the middle. Are you one of those people that like the book to look read and destroyed?
No, not necessarily. And I take good care of my books. I mean, I do, but I don't have a dislike of seeing a book that has clearly been loved. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I will definitely, there are some books that I have, I'm trying to think. I had a very bad copy of Blood Meridian for years. And it was actually so bad that, like, you know, and I'd gotten it like at a secondhand store that it had like kind of, I don't think I'd ever made it past page 40 or 50. And part of that certainly was that it's a hard book to read, and it's a hard one to get yourself excited about because it's so dark. But honestly, another part was the book itself. Like, it just, like, there was a feel as you were sitting and reading it where it wasn't that fun. So I ended up like giving that to one of those free little libraries, or maybe even the Goodwill up the street, you know, and getting rid of it and getting a nice copy and reading that book finally. You know, so there's times like that where for my own self I will, but I do like to see a book that's been read, if that makes sense. And I do like marginalia, you know, when you find a book that has notes. My uncle is a professor of English at a university here in North Carolina, and it's cool to look at his library, you know, and see his own like teaching notes in the margins. I mean, that kind of thing is neat.
Yeah. I guess if it makes sense.
But
There's someone at my local library that likes to correct grammar and spelling and stuff in books. So every now and then I pick up a book from the library where they've gone through and corrected the just little things that may have been missed, things that I would have missed if I read through it.
really, that is interesting. I don't actually make notes in my books. Do you?
No, I tried, but I don't do well with it. Like, I start out all right, but about page 10 or when I start really getting into the book, I kind of keep reading the book instead of making notes.
Yeah.
I would love to make notes. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I don't. I do keep a little notebook, you know, because I'm reviewing books now. If it's a translated literature book that I know I'm going to want to try it to review, but I just write down a page. So I'll write down like page 38. And then my process and idea is when I go back afterwards and look at page 38, if I can't find why I wrote it down, then it must not have been good enough. Do you know what I mean? To say anything about. But if I can immediately find on page 38, oh, this is why I wrote that down, then I know it's like, okay, that's good enough, you know, and I will highlight it. So I will put highlighter in my, you know, I got no problem with that. And I'll just like highlight the little bits. And then when I do a review, you know, I write down one word next to page 38, which will just say, you know, thoughts on death or whatever, and then go to that section. But that only started, you know, when I was doing BookTube. Like, otherwise I never put anything in my books. I have picked up, though, I will say, I just said I liked Marginalia, but I have picked up before used books. I had a copy the very first time I tried to read Pension. I think, like a lot of people, I was like, well, I'll read The Crying of Lot 49 because it's short. And, you know, like, so much of his stuff is so long.
Yeah.
And I opened it up, and I wish I had kept this copy just for this reason. But the Marginalia was the reader arguing with Pension, like, about the book, and so it was so distracting going through and like seeing her be like, I don't like this, or like, you know what I mean? Like, she had sections like crossed out like with a pencil, but
Yeah, see, I feel like that's how I tend to be when I try and write in the margins. It's like I get really sarcastic towards the author and like just question every decision they make.
So has there? That made me think a little bit of that book, Revenge of the Translator. There's got to be a book about Marginalia where it's an author sitting there having Pale Fire by Nabokov. Okay, that's the one. Okay, I was like, there's got to be a hugely like influential postmodern book. Okay, Pale Fire is the answer.
Yeah, I just have to correct you. It's Nabokov.
God. It's not Nabokov. Okay.
No.
I can't.
Every time I watch BookTube, I like yell at the screen when people pronounce it wrong.
I mean, I know I've mentioned this, I'm sure, to you before, but I mean, did you know about the Southern? I don't know how big of a like thing this is throughout the world, but do you know about the Southern American accent? Like that it's a thing? I mean, yeah. Okay, all right. So it's a thing, and it's very hard to get rid of, and also like it can turn on and off. Yes, exactly. It makes pronouncing words very difficult, and at least here, like it's a sign. Not in it. I mean, it shouldn't be, but it is unfortunately a sign of like a lack of intelligence or something. You know, so if you speak in that way, and I think the British has is it Cockney or
Cockney?
Yeah, like yeah. The same sort of thing that's kind of thought that way. That's like what, you know, Southern accent is like. So anyway, it's doubly hard for me to pronounce things.
It's really weird talking to translators, and when they start naming French or Spanish authors, and they do it so perfectly, but it sounds like their whole accent has changed.
Yeah, there was the podcast that you do this past week. I think you released the episode with Sophie Hughes, or it was a really interesting interview, and she had a point in there where she was talking about, I think it was Margaret Jill Costa, like that her translations were so good that she stopped hearing like two voices as she was reading the thing. And I thought about, you know, as someone who only speaks one language, like how special and cool that is that she can like experience all these books I love through both ways. And then how good some translator must be if even Sophie Hughes is like, yeah, but I didn't even hear a second thing. Didn't know it was translated. You know, like that was cool.
And this is why translators don't get credited.
Right. Right. Have you ever tried to like Google translate a tweet before though? Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a work that's going to the machines anytime soon.
No, definitely not. There are a few translators, I won't name them, but I kind of feel like they are like Google Translate. They're just very clinical about getting the exact word. And I never enjoy reading those because of that.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And there are times, there was a stretch where I thought I didn't like some regions' literature even because of that, because the 2 or 3 like translators that were putting out everything through them, it turned out that I just didn't love that style of technical hitting all the spots, you know what I mean, kind of thing, as opposed to, you know, letting their artistic side, letting the, you know, meaning of the words come out and whatnot. So all right, we tangented for a minute. I think I hit Booksellers. Okay, so I don't like the commercial. I don't like that whole idea of you making the money off of it. I don't like the objects as books, whatever. The other thing, though, I kind of briefly mentioned, but this is more about, I think we can dovetail to our own, the way we collect books. But the collectors that they were showing there, as I said, like had not made any choices, it didn't feel like, because they just had everything. And when you have everything, like your own taste and what you like and who you are as a reader doesn't come through. And I think of libraries and music collections and film collections as pieces of your personality. Like I want to see something, I want to learn something interesting about you and not just oh, you have this thing that's rare. Okay, well, what do you like about the author, whatever? And it's like, oh, it's just rare because they didn't make that many. Well, you know, I don't know. That just doesn't do anything for me.
I guess that's the difference between book selling as a book collecting as a hobby and as a actual passion. Like, there are people that want to collect the rare stuff because it'll be worth something in the future.
Yeah.
And it becomes more of like, what value can I get out of it rather than what value I can get out of reading it.
Very well put. Yeah. They were, one of the focuses of the documentary was lamenting, you know, not just the internet, but that there were fewer and fewer people interested in collecting, you know, so there was fewer customers. But what was interesting about that is that was coming from like the very elderly, gray-haired white men. There were younger women and people of color that were doing it very successfully right now because they understood that it was what had just changed was what people wanted to collect. There was this African-American woman who she was like finding and collecting old Source magazines, which is like a hip hop, you know, it's a major hip hop magazine or whatever. And, you know, if you had an original with a Tupac Shakur interview on it or whatever in nice condition, then it was like worth a lot of money, you know, like, and I thought it was interesting to see because I just thought to myself, okay, well, think about as people get older, what they are nostalgic for. And the types of books that those old white male booksellers were able to sell for years and years, people are no longer maybe nostalgic for it anymore. Like maybe an original Graham Greene, just there's a less amount of people that care. But that doesn't mean that there's not stuff that people want to collect. It's just different stuff, you know?
Well, you look at those old, like, Victorian movies with their amazing libraries, and you think, man, how wonderful it would be to own that library.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, they used to buy books by the yard.
Yeah.
It was just a decoration. It wasn't really the reading. It was just, let's fill up these shelves.
Yeah. What's your what's your shelf situation?
A mess.
A mess? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a few shelves. The shelves that I use, I normally film in front of.
Yep.
They normally got all my favorite books, all the better books that I owned. Most of them I've read, and they're in alphabetical order by author. Every other bookshelf is just, I need room to fit a book on the shelf, so
okay,
that's where it's going.
Yeah, and there's not like what you're reading right now. Like, where would that be in relation to you in the house usually? Like, is it a table?
I have a bookshelf next to my bed.
Okay.
And that's got a whole lot of books on it. The top shelf is pretty much all my TBR books. Like, these are the ones I want to get to.
Yeah.
Eventually, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
And that just gets bigger and bigger.
So I don't, and I'm so strict to myself about that because it makes me like my particular type of anxiety. If I get a TBR that is over 20 books, then it starts to feel to me like I am like letting myself down. I start to like beat myself up about not getting to something. I start to feel like I've lost the stream of it, and then I'm not enjoying it as much. So I really, really try not. It's been hard right now because I've been wanting to support local bookstores that have been, you know, not local to me, but indie bookstores that I really like here in America that have had to transfer completely to shipping, you know. So I have bought more books, you know, in a shorter amount of time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's an amount of books I would always buy, but like usually over a longer period of time. And it has made my TBR getting, I think at my next book mail, it might be up to 15, 16, which is just makes me anxious. It's a lot. I mean, but do you feel that way at all? Or is it just, these are books?
No, well, my book, the way I buy books has definitely changed. There was a point of where I would buy lots of books, and there was just about, I'll read this eventually, so I'll get a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love going to a bookshop and just stocking up on books. I don't do that as much anymore. I feel like because my focus has now shifted to more translations, it's harder to find them, which means I buy less. But there's still a lot I want to read. But there's a lot of books on my shelves that I haven't read, and I'm not sure if I would read them anymore because my interest I've changed interest in what I like to read and what I like to buy.
So would you ever clear any of those out?
It's hard to let go of a book that you've not read. Well, I find it hard to let go of a book I haven't read. It's like I might actually read this one day, but I don't feel like I'm interested in it now.
So I mean, it doesn't happen often, but yeah, I'll get rid of mine. We have there are two really good combination used book stores here. So, sometimes I'll go and just sell them for store credit. And, they have records and books. So I'll just turn around and get some records, or, I try not to sell books for books because that to me is like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of weird, but so I'll do that. Or I've given, like I said, like the local, like Goodwill. I don't know if you have those there, but they're like, thrift shops. Okay. So yeah, I'll take a box down there twice a year of stuff. My wife is fine getting rid of anything. So if it's something that she read that I know I have no desire to read, then that's going to go, in there because she just doesn't want to keep them and says, get rid of them. And she reads about 80% from the library. So for her, it wouldn't, it just doesn't happen much. But for me, if I've bought something and it's been a year, I haven't read it, and there's no strong pulse to kind of read it, I will throw it back into the stream. That's the way I kind of like to think of it, and I don't know, and it'll find its home or its way another way, but not me. I feel like when I do that, there's a little bit of a failure on me as a reader. Maybe this is back to the anxiety thing, but a little bit of the failure of, okay, whatever urge caused me to get this book was not strong enough for me to read it. So I should pay attention to that, what I mean? Because I don't want to do it. I'm not like rich, like most people, so I can't like buy every single book. I have to make choices, and so I do kind of like give myself a little bit of, okay, think about why you bought this, like what was. So one of the things I do, like one recommendation is rarely enough anymore for me to buy something if I had not already heard of it. I want to see some buzz amongst this really small community of translated literature, about something. But it can really, like, at the end of the year, there are times where I will stop looking at those end of the year lists because I you just want to buy it. And like, then you won't get to it. And then of course there's new releases coming. I don't know. You mentioned not having the access. So do you have a local bookshop there that you go to regularly?
Yeah. We do have a local indie bookstore, which is an amazing bookstore, but it doesn't have too much translations. It will get in the ones that are, kind of popular, ones that people are talking about. But rarely do I find stuff that feels a little off brand, like not. Obviously, they've got to pick books that are going to sell. So the way they choose the books are obviously going to be the ones where they're going to pick the books that are going to go off the shelf and not stay there for ages.
Yeah. Not waiting for you to walk in. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they're waiting for me.
Relying on you. Maybe relying on you is the better. Yeah.
Probably was a time where they did.
Oh, really? So why did you slow down your own buying then?
I think it was because I shifted my interest towards translations. And that just meant that I got more focused on what I was interested in.
Yeah.
Like before that, I was exploring every genre, trying different stuff, and I would pick up books that sounded interesting. And there's a lot of those books in a lot of different genres.
Yeah, when I moved, wow, I am outside on a screened-in porch, so there's a little honking next door. When I moved to translated literature as like a pretty sole focus of my reading, the one thing that did kill for me is used bookshops became far less important because they are not buying and selling for the most part translated literature.
Yeah,
you know how hard it is just for a great indie to have the new titles. Well, the used bookshop, no way. Now, when I was super into noir, like that's great, and easy, and they always buy up Jim Thompson and David Goodis, and if you're the lucky next one to come in to see that title, that's awesome. But it does not work that way, obviously, with translated literature. So I buy a lot more books new, which also just like changes my book budget and buying patterns. So I really have to be purposeful and thoughtful about what it is I want to buy, but we have, I have a subscription. I do have to Open Letter and Deep Vellum, but I don't think either one does international subscriptions, right?
Well, they do. It's just gets not really expensive. It's not logical. It's definitely not worth that price, I don't think.
Right.
I think like the shipping costs more than the subscription alone.
Right, because the subscriptions alone are like very reasonable, and
yeah.
So that's a unique challenge to living on a very, very large island, I guess, across the globe, Yeah. And then I guess the other side of it though is I get British titles much later, typically, I'm assuming, than you do.
Yeah. Well, they import a lot of stuff from the UK publishing.
So when you're in an indie bookshop there, so here it's going to be predominantly American, obviously, with a little bit of translated literature. And then, if there's a big English book or something like that, yes, but we're not going to find much Australian lit or anything. Like, so how much of that is at your indie bookstore? Like,
well, there's a lot of American literature.
So it's still like every other part of like any kind of culture, America still has to.
Yeah, it does have a lot of American. There's a big chunk of UK.
Yeah.
And obviously Australian literature is going to be promoted as best as possible. There's some really good Australian literature and prizes. Yep. So they do get the attention, which is helpful. But yeah, it's rare to find a bookstore in Australia where they actually have an international literature section.
Okay.
It's always a joy to come across that.
So we have, where I live is outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. So, but it's called the Triangle. So there's three little cities, Raleigh, Chapel Hill, and Durham, that all are kind of college towns, although Raleigh is also the capital. But so there's a bookstore in each of those, indie bookstore, that I really like. And I like them for different reasons, and they kind of do different things better than others. But the one here in Raleigh, which is just like a 20-minute drive away, is Quail Ridge Books. And they have a huge, like 6-shelf translated literature by country. And I had learned maybe 2 months ago or so that it's because Chad Post, who is the director of Open Letter, worked there like in his 20s, and set up that section. So that was pretty cool to learn, like, it's still going and doing well. I mean, because it's actually, of the three, it's not my favorite it's my kids love it, and it's got a great kids section, but it's more like they are trying to turn books. You know what I mean? Like it is.
Yeah.
It's indie, but they're going to sell you a ton of puzzles and tchotchke, that kind of stuff. So, but they still have this like vibrant translated literature section, which it was cool to learn like how that came about and that it's still there.
Well, the other topic we wanted to talk about was the book The Library at Night by Alberto Manguel, which is basically a bunch of essays talking about the history of libraries, but it's also about him building his personal library, which he like converted a barn in the back of his house into his personal library. Do you have a dream library setup or idea?
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I bought an old camper trailer 3 years ago or so, and we were talking at that time about maybe doing like a bookmobile thing. And it was during this stage where we were basically, before I had found a community like this and stuff, like I was just not able to scratch an itch when it came to books and my love of reading and stuff like that. And my wife and I both were just kind of looking for something fun, whatever. So we spent some time and a little bit of money trying to fix it up right. And it wasn't going to work with our life since we have 2 kids, the age we have. And book selling is already not a super profitable business. Book selling in a bookmobile, in an area where, as I just mentioned, we have 3 great indie bookstores, it just wasn't going to be it. But I still longer term like the idea for myself of a little shed or camper out back here that's got electricity, that is you go in and there's my personal library. So the barn thing, actually, it's interesting that's what that is, because something like that would be a dream sort of library, like a transitioned Airstream or wherever, where you opened up the door and in it was my stuff, something small, because I said before, like I want to make some choices about what it is, that's there. What about you?
Well, I always like the idea of a small like room or shed or something, obviously air conditioned because it's freaking hot here, full of books, like a reading room, like shelves and a place to read. But yeah, my dream is to like have them by continent, maybe break it down a little bit. Like obviously French literature would probably have to have its own section, and Russian literature, Argentinian, and all that. But I'd love to have like a library where it is broken down by continent and maybe some countries as well.
Yeah, I've never thought about a way other than by last name. It's just kind of how I've always done it. But I love that idea. Have you heard of? Have there been any other like cool ways that you've seen people talk about how they organize their shelves? I mean,
are you talking about the rainbow bookshelves?
I'm definitely not talking about the rainbow bookshelves, but yeah, I do know of this.
Well, yeah, but there are different ways, like by genre, obviously.
Yep.
That's
tough in the translated literature, though.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the things when people ask me like what I read, and you say translated literature, it's kind of like, what does that mean? Is sometimes
it's not a genre.
It's not a genre. I just finished Tentacle, which is definitely sci-fi and weird. Do you know what I mean? And now I'm reading what I would consider to be like a Western, like it goes across all the genres. But there have been times where I've thought about looking through my books and organizing just momentarily by philosophical theme, if that makes sense. But I don't know that would actually work. I think sometimes I finish something that is heavily philosophical, and I'm like, this would be fun right next to this other book,
or
whatever, whatever it is. Like,
Have you seen the film High Fidelity,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
where he organizes his books or his records autobiographical?
yeah. That's a great.
That's,
Yeah,
that
I
just
have
reminded me of that.
I have a friend, my buddy, who's a musician, and he like when I finished Booksellers, I called him to talk about it because I know that he's worked in record stores, he's collected records, which I never have. I'm not big into that, but he is. So I knew he would know about the culture of that. You know what I mean? And he talked about like, you know, when he scaled back to really like, okay, I want 5 great things instead of, in one sound instead of 50 of everything. And I have found that that kind of seems to be the case for most like the people that engage with the stuff. Like, so for record collectors, somebody that actually is going to put that record on and listen to it, as opposed to it just collect dust, or the opposite kind of the book thing we're talking about, where you do want the quality over quantity sometimes.
Yeah.
But his is organized, he was saying, by like sound and then era. So it like kind of goes like this, you could follow the way that the sound sort of transformed. And that is a unique sort of way. You can't really do that with books.
You could probably go literary periods, like do the Victorian.
Yeah. That would be interesting. What messes with me there, though, are those things that are so out of their own time. And you know how those are sometimes the best, like, where it's like, this isn't really of the 60s style,
Yeah.
of writing or whatever, but it's when it was published, like knowing kind of what to do with that. I guess right now, like, what time are we in now? The fever dream era, maybe? Like, that seems to be like that's the only trend I can really think of that's happening of the moment is, it just takes too long, I think, with literature to really know what is happening right now. Whereas with music and movies, for some reason, it feels like you can put your finger on it a little easier.
I thought we were still in the Harry Potter era.
We might be. I mean, that's true. Like, we talk about era, like, yeah, that's what sells. I mean,
or maybe we could be in the 50 Shades era. Who knows?
But like, of the stuff that will be studied in the serious literature, that kind of stuff. I mean,
It'd be Twilight.
Like, you never know in the moment, do you? I mean,
no.
Yeah.
If you had to start your library again, are there publishers, or how would you go about like building your own library? Like as a collection, not as a room.
Yeah, as a collection. I think that anytime I have gotten excited about a publisher, I have wished I knew about the publisher, 2 to 3 years earlier, like, so I am not someone who is typically the first on any of that stuff, I definitely look to like booksellers and those types of people to see like what's cool. They have a better sense of it. The only thing I could think of that I was like, was Charco just came to America, so at least like I know about Charco Press, but when it comes to Deep Vellum, Open Letter, and other stories, Two Lines Press, those are the big ones here in America for translated literature, and they already had a decent back catalog by the time I was paying close attention to it. So if I started over with a collection, I would have just gotten that stuff earlier, because I would have then more of the back catalog. But at the same time, like, it goes back to that reading versus collecting. I like how I do it because it feels organic in terms of like what I actually want to and am going to read. I was saying that thing about my TBR. So my shelves in there, I have an office. I work from home even when we're not, even when we're not forced to. But I work from home where it's just me, not two kids, and also a wife working from home. So I'm a bit more productive. But so I work from home anyway, and so I have an office, and in that office, like we bought these IKEA bookshelves, and then like put them on the wall so it makes it look like they're built-ins. It's like a cheap hack trick. And I was looking at today. I think they hold about 500. So those are books that have been read by one or both of us. And then in our bedroom, like I have there's one bookshelf that's hers of TBR, and then I have another one that's TBR. And as I said, like I don't let it get to 20, or if I do, I'm really super anxious about it before I would start to give stuff away. So another thing that I will do is like I won't let that bookshelf in there that holds 500, those shelves. I'm not going to let that go over 500, So when I talk about twice a year going and giving away from some books, that's because there will always be sometimes decisions that have to be made. So even though I just said, I wish I had paid more attention to publishers and stuff, those are just more books that would leave. Like I really do like having some, and if I had like the Airstream or whatever, I think obviously we could maybe move to 800 or something, but I'd still want a place to sit down and read. Like, I'd still want that area to be a part of it. So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I do wish as a reader, and so this does dovetail with collecting, I wish that I hadn't stayed interested in noir for so long that I got into the really bad mystery writing. Do you know what I mean? Like for just a brief period, it's like I got a little too popcorn, you know what I mean? Like type of things where
the Penny Dreadful stuff.
Yes. And I should have noticed like a little earlier, like, oh, I'm writing and reading this at the same time because these plots are just so familiar. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting. Like, I like that question because the question to me is more about how do you wish your reading life had been different, not collecting. Because I just can't separate the two. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's something for you would do differently if you started the collection part over now?
I'd probably focus just on translations, obviously.
Yeah.
I think, like if I lost all my books that I had to rebuild, there are books that I would rebuy.
Yeah.
But I don't know what I would buy immediately. Like, I'd probably pick up some Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Bulgakov, obviously, but there are things there that I'm not sure if I lost the book, would I rebuy it?
What about American writers? And I'm not going to count Nabokov. I got closer. What about American writers? Valillo? I mean, is there something you'd buy? You're buying White Noise again, or like?
I haven't read White Noise.
Okay, I haven't. I just picked that one.
There's a lot of DeLillo and Pynchon and all that I haven't read.
Okay.
I'd probably buy Underworld again.
Yeah.
DeLillo. I'd probably buy the Raymond Chandler books again.
Yeah. So in my all right, so the history of my collection of the reading stuff means that I have rebought quite a bit, and that's because I moved out of my house at 16, very young over here for that time. I started college at 17. So I was in communal, like punk rock houses, I'd call them. Though today that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it used to be that there'd be these houses where like you'd have shows in the living room. And like, I was one of those people that lived in one of the bedrooms upstairs kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's 8 people living there. There's a constant rotating thing of touring bands and that kind of thing. So your stuff can't be precious, because it's going to just whatever. So, and you also move very frequently. So I lived that life from about 16 to 21. And then that's when I met my now wife, who me and her then moved together, whatever. But there's that period of time, right? And then when my wife and I got together, like we lived in a very small apartment when she was going to grad school, and then we lived in afterwards DC, and again in like another sort of apartment where we couldn't have a lot of stuff. We were constantly getting rid of things that we had read and whatever. So we never had, a library thing. This was the first time when we moved down to North Carolina. That was the first time that you could collect anything. Everything else was just sort of always in transit. So because of that, there have been quite a few books I've bought more than once. I mentioned Blood Meridian, but I mean, I've bought David Marks. I bought Wittgenstein's Mistress 3 times, probably, because I just had it, lost it, had it, lost it, the translated literature, like I've been stable, like where I live and who I am since then. So there hasn't been much of that I've rebought, but some of those, like, A Fan's Notes by Frederick Exley, like I've bought that probably 3 times, I mean, and so that's always been interesting to me, is the ones that you do choose to rebuy, because that I don't reread a lot of books, because there's always something new I want to read. So if you're rebuying something, to me, that it's got a bigger significance in your life than just a run-of-the-mill kind of book.
Yeah. Are there authors there that you would want all their books on your shelf?
Yeah.
Or do you just...
Yeah, there are. I mean, I think I probably have all of Chandler on my shelf, but that's not a ton of stuff, right? I mean, that's like
7 books.
Yeah, that's not too hard. In that same vein, I think I have all Jim Thompson, which is a little bit more, but not a ton. And I think I probably have all David Goodis. I think David Goodis is harder because there's some stuff that may not be, like, maybe I need to contact one of those people in Booksellers, that documentary, and find out if they've got some hidden tips. But yeah, I would. I'm trying to think of one, like, really. I have all Bolaño. I mean, that's easier, right? Because it's like 2004, maybe, when the first one came out here.
Yeah, true.
I would like to have all of. I wish we could change his last name so I could pronounce it, but Nabokov. I don't have all his. I'd like to have all his.
Yeah. Nabokov's interesting because he translated his own books, the ones he originally wrote in Russian.
There was a book I read last year, The Translator's Bride, where he translated his own.
Yeah.
That's really neat. Like, that whole idea of translating your own book. When I did the review, I wanted to be like, I loved the author. I loved the book. It just, the translator just didn't do it. Really screwed it up. Yeah. What about you? Is there anybody you'd like to own everything of?
Well, I'm really terrible at, like, being a completionist. I read 1, maybe 2 books of an author, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much to read. But I would love to eventually get to all of Bolaño's books. I think that'd be really neat to do. I'd like to do all of Dostoevsky and some of those Russians.
Yeah.
I do own, I think, all of Welbeck's books, which is about 8. I'm not sure if I would read them all now because he's a bit of it's a complex feeling towards him, but, like, I enjoy most of what I've read.
Yeah.
It just makes me angry.
Well, the Bolaño one's interesting because it's not hard. Like, once you read 266, you've read the long thing. Do you know what I mean? And everything else is pretty quick to get through, And I'm assuming Savage Detective is obviously already read. It's usually First People's whatever. Yeah. So that one's not a hard one to get, to read and to get everything of. Walbeck, like, I definitely have not read everything. I mean, that feels like more substantial of Yeah. Oh, Caesar Aria, that would be a fun one to have everything.
That would be, yeah. But there's so many of them.
Exactly. But that would, you'd have, I mean, I couldn't do my 500 rule anymore. Like, I would never get past the A's.
Yeah.
But
I still haven't read him.
Have you've never read anything of his?
No, not yet.
So that's, I mean, I probably mentioned this, but like, I have a total love-hate. He writes so many that there's the quality to me is not uniform. You know what I mean? Like, and his style too, like he famously says he doesn't edit. I mean, who knows what to believe, but you know, if he writes himself into a plot problem, he forces himself to write out of it. And there have been a couple books of his where I've read it, and right at one point I'm like, "Ooh, I wish you hadn't written yourself into this plot problem," because you know it would be better if you had not. But when it works, it's it's just brilliance, you know, and it's they're one sitting reads, and like I love those. Those are always like super special to me when you've got a one sit, you know, get through it. So Aria would be a fun one.
Are there any others?
Not that would mean it. No, because I'm like you, where like even like so just away from translated literature, like there have been times where I have owned all of David Foster Wallace, for instance.
Yep.
Now I have Infinite Jest, and I think I have one collection of essays because I love A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, the essay on a cruise ship. And I will pick that up every couple of years and read the essay. I have no desire now to own all of his stuff and, you know, have a more complicated, just like you did with Wolbach, sort of relationship with, you know, him as an author or whatever. But definitely a time when I owned all of Pynchon, but after a certain amount, like I was talking about earlier, of never reading V and never reading Gravity's Rainbow, you know, it's like, I actually still do have Gravity's Rainbow because I've told myself that's one of the books that I'm going to read this year that's a non-translated that I'm going to force myself. But anyway, you know, but that's one where
1,000 pages.
I know, and it's probably going to be the same thing again where I bail on it, but. So I've had times where I was being a completist, you know, and I did that with DeLillo too, I'm sure. I mean, he still writes, you know what I mean? So,
yeah,
you know, I probably didn't have like his most recent 2 or whatever, but, you know, certainly like up to a point I had everything. And, you know, I don't anymore. So obviously completism is not that important to me, you know. There's no others I can think. There's no book. I mean, if I wanted a book, I would get it probably. I know that's like a really privileged place to be in, but like I am usually more interested in a writer I've never read as opposed to a writer that I've read and loved. As weird as
I can't think of many prolific authors that I would want to complete all their works.
Yeah.
Like, I'll read all of Ariadne Horwitz's books, but she's only had 2 translated.
Right. And there's something to that level of quality, too, that, like, I think it's hard to be that prolific and that great. I mean, you know, even in Bolano, we were talking about, I mean, there's a couple in there that are not that great. I mean, if that was his only work, we would not know his name. You know what I mean? Like, it's good in the context of his larger, you know, catalog, and it's good because it's him and he's no longer here, so you want to, you know, squeeze that out a little bit. But yeah, I can't think of, I mean, there are new writers now, you know, Horwitz is a great example. Mel Core, I mean, whatever she writes after hurricane season, you know, which we've talked about, we'll definitely jump on. Schreiber, I'll read, you know, everything that she's got. Am I saying her name right?
Yeah, Samantha Schreiber.
Okay, Schreiber. Okay, yeah.
She's not even one of my favorite Argentinian authors, but she seems to be the most popular. And I don't understand why.
Well, and do we count Horwitz as Argentinian? Like, I don't know, because she's like has lived in France now for like a significant portion of her life, and
yeah,
it at least I think both of those books were set in France too. So, like, you know,
Is that like claiming the book off as American?
yeah, and I don't think it's fair to claim him as American. I think that, I mean, sensibility wise, like maybe you can, say, well, he might have been influenced by, teaching in America or being here, but like he's clearly much more of the world and in the world, in my opinion, of translated literature, even if he's writing in English and translating his own stuff. The ethos is still one of, looking at things from a much broader perspective than your typical American novel that's like, here's about a school in Kansas, or here's what it was like in New York in 1975. And, there's just like, okay. But yeah, so there's some newer, this would be an interesting follow-up in 20 years, because so much of the stuff we're liking right now, they're our age that are writing it,
Yeah.
I mean, Ariana Horowitz is probably our age, so maybe in 20 years we'll be like, oh yeah, we had to have everything, that she wrote. But there's not a lot of dead white men that I feel I need to own everything of.
Or women.
Or women. Yeah, that's true. My wife would probably like to own every Joyce Carol Oates, but she does not.
Wow, that's a lot of books.
Yeah, it's a lot of books. She does. I think she may own about every Louis Erdrich, is how you say it. I've never read anything, but it takes up a lot of shelf space in our ease. And it's a lot about Native American writing. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, my wife, I think, owns all of Diana Gabaldon, so we won't talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm happy with my library being a living thing too. Like that part I like a lot. And nothing in that documentary felt like a living thing. What about that book? I mean, did it feel like a library that he was walking into and picking up something and reading?
Yeah, he was building his dream library. He was building what he wanted.
Okay.
It was basically like he was making choices that was going to make him happy. Like he's had his literary criticism section, and he had all the books. He divided it by continent. That's why I went with that as well.
So I would like to read, of any like current writer, I would love to read Enrique Villamatas talk about his collection, whatever it is, and his library. Since everything he writes is about being literature sick, like, tell me your home library and what it's like. I think that would be really cool. I mean, there's that have listening or reading authors talk about that is really, really fascinating to me, because that's where you're getting to see where the inspirations kind of lie and the things that they mess with. Like, what is it that they love,
Yeah, that would be interesting. I need to read more of his. I've only read Mac and His Problem.
Yeah, that's a really good one to start with, because you hit all the themes. You'll never be surprised by a theme, But and that's like, that's sort of the complaint, but also the fun. And that's a great one. He's a great one to go through and like literally as you're reading, write down what writers he's talking about. That's how I first read Sergio Pitol, I think is how you pronounce it. And Carmen Bulsa, who actually just has a new book out, at least in America. It does. The Book of Anna. I don't know if you've seen that cover or...
No.
Okay.
It's not coming to me at the moment.
It's not coming. Okay. Well, anyway, so yeah, so there's been at least 2 writers that just from his fiction I've picked up something from. So that's pretty cool.
I think someday we probably have to have a conversation about books and books that talk about books as like different authors and stuff like that, because that'd be an interesting topic to go through as well.
Yes, it would. It's always fun to look through the shelf and pull out by topic. You know what I mean? That's, that ties this up nicely, but that's the fun of the library, right? Is like thinking about something and then going through. When I first started doing booktube videos, that was one of my favorite things, to be able to actually pick 4 or 5 books to talk about along with one book, and to be able to walk into a room in my house and do that. Like, that's cool,
Part of me doesn't like organizing my books because I love just going through a shelf and not knowing what book I'll see on that shelf.
Yeah.
Just like you go hunting for a book and you have to go through and you discover all these other books that you've forgotten about or have great memories of.
I agree. I actually wish I could think of a way better than last names are different, because
Color.
our eye levels, are always the same. So it's like when I walk into the room, I am always looking at the same. I'm always, for whatever reason, it's M, So I'm always looking at the M's, and that part, yeah, it'd be kind of cool if it was just a little different. I wish there was a fairy who at night would come in and every single night rearrange them and surprise me. So
I think your kids could do that.
they could probably do that, although it would just be a mess. I mean, it would not be very entertaining.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think we've done an hour's worth. I think we should end there.
That was fun. This is hopefully a cool experiment. We'll see if it has a long tail, if people are interested in it at all.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to maybe go through some other topics then.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how well it will do, but it'd be cool just to record some topics anyway.
Absolutely. And it's all relative when you're dealing with bookish people, because
yeah,
you know what I mean? We're not talking about the Avengers.
All right. You're linked to your channels in the description anyway, so hopefully people will check out your channel as well.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
All right. We'll do this again.
Thanks.
All right. Catch ya.